So now I am very happy to be announcing Sam Altman, who is really like one of a handful of people who doesn't really need an introduction in Silicon Valley, but I'll say just the same that he is the YC chairman and the president of OpenAI. Sam, come on over here. Thanks. Give him a big round. Thank you, Sam. So I was just delighted when Sam agreed to do this. I had the pleasure of interviewing him a couple of years ago at Disrupt, and it was very fun. So
I remember.
yes, well, it's nice to see you again.
Thanks for having me back.
So I was just telling Sam that although I feel like it's maybe boring for him, I always love hearing him talk about founders. In fact, I run slowly and I listen to podcasts sometimes, and I was listening to your recent interview, maybe it was in February, with this economist, Tyler Cohen, who is pretty well known. He works at George Mason University outside of Washington. And he had a long sit down with Sam, and they were talking a little bit about pattern recognition. Sam's obviously seen a lot of founders. There's a lot of founders here. So one thing I thought you said that was really interesting was, and you said you weren't even necessarily happy with this discovery, but that you felt a lot of the best founders you'd met come from a certain background. They are upper middle class, but not from like super rich families, maybe not from middle class, certainly not from poor. And so I just wondered, why is that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously think it's a real shame that there aren't more successful founders who grew up super poor or super rich, for that matter. You sort of need enough stability and like blessings in life to even sort of have a shot at compounding through your education and early career long enough to be able to be a really successful founder. I think a thing that I have said before and fundamentally believe to be true is that the two great gifts I got in life were a great education and the love of my parents. Speaking of, my mom is here. Yeah, wasn't planning on that. I got very lucky and got the best mom ever, which probably had more to do with my success than anything else, honestly. I mean that. But I think if you don't grow up in a stable environment with a great education and loving parents and the ability to, afford everything that it takes between starting your life and starting a company, it's very hard to have a real shot at doing that.
It's interesting. It a little bit echoes something that Doug Leone of Sequoia Capital told me during a separate interview last year. He was saying, my children will be deprived in one way or disadvantaged, which is that they'll never be as hungry as I was as this young immigrant from Italy when he was a kid. And obviously, he's done very well for himself. You also said, which I thought was interesting, and I am aware of this, but when applicants to YC used to apply, it was like an hour-long process.
Yeah.
And then it got down to 10 minutes, and you said you thought it could get down to 5 minutes. So obviously,
I think what I meant to say is, I don't think it's like socially acceptable to make it 5 minutes.
That would be a little rude.
Yeah, I think that'd be pretty rude. But I think we could make decisions that are 90% or 95% as good as we make with a 10-minute interview in 5 minutes. I interviewed for YC in the first batch ever. It was 40 minutes, or maybe 45. Like, there's some, we don't quite remember which of those, but one of those two. And at the time, Paul and Jessica thought that was like as short as it could be. And we have found, to our great surprise, that although we make many other mistakes in our interview process at the other stages, like once we get the founders in the room, once we get to sit down and sort of talk to them, we don't mess that up too often. And it doesn't take much data. So many of the skills about what it takes and so many of kind of the sorts of thought processes and the way people react to being pushed on their idea are evident in the first few minutes you talk to somebody. That one way we could scale YC that I think might work is to just figure out how to do 25,000 in-person interviews a year.
I've heard you say that before. It's astonishing. But I also just wondered, beyond the thought process, and it sounds like maybe it's like a little bit adversarial where they come in and you try to poke holes, or no, not really.
Even the founders that we don't fund, which is a lot, they say it's really fun, and it's definitely fun for us. An interview, if it's going really well, ends up feeling like the first set of office hours we have with the company, where we talk about sort of their plan to sort of make this great product or service or whatever. And even if we don't end up funding you, it's usually still fun.
Okay, so not like you're not antagonizing them to see if
No,
they're
I
gonna
think
fall
people
apart.
like there's this cottage industry that's popped up, like college admissions for YC, and so like we can usually tell who's done it too. It doesn't help, but if it's going really well, it's not what people expect. It is a like, let's talk together about how to build this company into something really big and see if we can figure out how to do that.
Well, one thing Paul said years ago, I think maybe even before you were president, I saw him talking about meeting with founders, and one thing that disqualified them immediately for him was if he saw one founder talking and the other founder rolled their eyes. I mean, it's such an obvious, like, display of disdain, I guess. But that's a little bit more obvious if you're looking for it. Are there any sort of physical clues that you're looking for?
I mean, contempt is bad. Like that's true. People think we have all these like secret things that we look for, and yes, like open contempt, as in any relationship, is like that's a sign for us to like walk away slowly. Other than that, no, there are no like secret physical things we're looking for. And we say all the time, like, what we look for. Like, fortunately, it's really hard to fake. One of the things that I look for the most is someone who's a clear communicator. And that's good because if you're not like, I can tell someone, hey, that's what I'm going to be evaluating you on. And if you're not a clear communicator, that one's really hard to fake. And yet, to be an effective CEO, like 95% of your job is effective communication and evangelism and telling the story of the company to people you're trying to hire and retain and sell to and get press from and whatever else. So there's a lot of things like that where we just tell people what it is. Like, if you cannot clearly communicate an ambitious vision, we'll probably not fund you. And you can't fake us out on that.
I'd heard Dave Goldberg, the founder of SurveyMonkey, talk about that once, that it's salesmanship, which I think is another way of saying good communication is so underrated in entrepreneurship. I did wonder, since this is sort of always of interest to a lot of people here, does age factor into your calculations? Or
Well, they have to be 18. No, like there was one batch where we funded. They don't. As soon as I said that, I realized in one batch we funded a 15-year-old whose parents signed documents for him, and also I think someone who was like 78 or 80.
no.
Yeah,
Really?
the oldest and the youngest YC founder ever in the same batch. Like we do. I think it's no secret that we've made like most of our best investments have been in people that are sort of in their mid 20s to mid 30s. But there's exceptions on all sides of that, and over time I expect there to be more. What we do care about is for whatever circumstances in life you were born into and have had, and for whatever age you are, you have excelled at every step of the way. Whatever hand life dealt you to play, you have done as well as anyone we can imagine. And so we grade harder on like a 40-year-old than a 20-year-old, but that's probably the difference.
Interesting. One last thing about.
Oh, can I say one more thing about that?
Absolutely.
I think when many people say age, they mean it as a shortcut for someone who's willing to like work super hard. And I think it is true. And I think it's a real disservice when people pretend like you can be a founder of a company and not have to work extremely hard and make it, at least for some period of time, like the priority in your life. But there are people of any age that are willing to do that and people of any age that are willing not to. And I think maybe that was sort of part of the question, or at least people often mean it as
if you're
shorthand.
factoring in somebody's got hard stops, this is going to be sort of problematic on their founder journey.
It's definitely, people do it, but we try to really be upfront about how hard it is, because the only time that I've heard people feel bad about doing YC was when they feel like you weren't honest with me about just how much I was going to have to sacrifice in my life to do this. And so I think it does us no good, and in fact is actively hurtful, us being like the ecosystem of Silicon Valley, to pretend like you can start a startup that is going for hyperscale and not have to work extremely hard.
I think Paul's even said that one of the worst things that can happen to you is that your company succeeds, when you're really young.
Yeah, it takes over your life to a degree that people don't believe us when we tell them.
One other thing he had said historically, and it's changed so much at YC over the years, was that you had to be lean. He was telling founders, you wanted to sort of get to ramen profitable. Now YC companies are graduating and they're getting millions of dollars because of YC.
Tens of millions.
Tens of millions.
It's not good.
Huge valuations.
Yeah.
Right. So where does that
Look, if I could control the market, which obviously the free market is going to do its thing, I would not have YC companies raise the amount of money they raise or at the valuations they do. I have thought more than I care to admit about like improbable schemes to reduce that, because I do think it is on net bad for the startups, even though in some individual cases it turns out to be really good. This is going to sound like it's not true. I wish it were not the case that just because you got into YC means you get to raise millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars at the end of YC without, in my opinion, enough diligence or discipline around price. Because I think that has downstream effects. It hurts the companies in their next round, a whole bunch of other things. But that is, we do our stuff, the ecosystem adapts to us.
And you don't advise them actively, don't do this.
Oh, I do. They never listen. But, the ecosystem is the ecosystem. I think it will all correct over time. In any given year, it can be frustrating. But over time, I think capital just sort of slashes around seeking for the best return. We created a return for a while that was incredibly unusual. So money flooded into our ecosystem. Prices have come up. It should normalize somewhat at some point, I hope. But I also think not only does YC get really good companies, we actually significantly increase the number of good companies in the world. And so in some sense, this is a response to that. And that part I hope keeps going.
How do you mean?
Before YC came along, if you wanted to start a company, you had to have gone to a fancy business school, have written this nice business plan, have experienced managers on the team, and most importantly, you had to network, which is basically shorthand for be from the right socioeconomic class to have a chance, or a white dude or whatever, to have a chance at getting investment. VCs used to brag about how they wouldn't take a meeting without an intro from someone I trust. And I think YC has only ever had maybe 5 total innovations, but one of them is that anyone in the world could apply. And they do. And sometimes they're really great, and we put in the effort to find them. And I think that plus another one of our very few innovations, which is we don't keep any of our advice secret. We just publish all of it. We encourage people to read it. I think those two things together have increased the number of good companies in the world that people decide to start and to make it into the ecosystem.
It's interesting. I mean, there was so much transparency. I'm not sure where it started. Maybe it did start with YC, but I think that's had a huge impact. Okay, so shifting to the personal, when you were made president, the sort of story is there was not even anyone else being considered.
Yeah, look, I think all of these things get canonized over time. That probably wasn't true. I know that has become the myth, but I'm sure they had other ideas if I didn't say yes.
Well, I was just going to ask where you think you are stronger than Paul and Jessica, and where you think maybe you're weaker as the leader of YC.
I mean, weaker in almost every way. What PG and Jessica did with YC is a miracle that has happened in the investing industry a number of times. I feel I can count on one hand. The change, I was basically handed a thing that all I had to do was not screw up. And I think I've done a good job, certainly better job than expected. But anyone would have done a pretty good job. YC was, there's this thing that you can tell in a company when it is gonna be successful, and it's so much more successful on the inside already than people realize. And by the time I took over YC, it was definitely in that category. And so any monkey could have done a pretty good job. And I'm proud of the job that I did. And I think I did a few things extremely well and some badly, but it's definitely a case where they get the credit for this one. And that's not false modesty. There's plenty of other things in my life I would take credit for.
Well, I did want to ask you in the vein of corny questions, what you do think your sort of biggest strengths and weaknesses are generally.
Wow, this is like a bad job interview. I've never been asked that question in real life before. Man. So I think people that run companies are usually they're either a good leader or a good manager. And I think I am a good leader and a bad manager. So I think, oh, you wrote something mean about me that I'm just remembering
Yes.
now.
Well, I was going to say, yes.
Many
No,
things,
it
but
wasn't
one
you.
that just came to mind. I didn't like that article, by the way. Just in the
You
interest
said it was
of
okay, but you did
yeah,
have
yeah.
some complaints.
That's fine. You do you, as the kids say. No, it's cool. I'm a big Connie fan. I'm here. I don't do many of these. I think you said something like, I'm not known for being a terribly warm boss.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about this.
Something
yes,
like that.
Because you've said you don't care what people think about you, but this was something that I had talked to about people, and they said not in a disparaging way, but that Sam is a little bit removed and not a terribly warm boss, and you like pretty quickly called me out on that. So did I hurt your feelings, or was it just that you thought it was such a gross mischaracterization?
Both. I think it is a meme. Again, these like stories get told. Like I think I am not the kind of manager that wants to spend like a lot of time with people in like daily one-on-ones talking about their feelings. I'm much more interested in saying like, okay, like there's this interesting thing. Let's go figure out how to get it done. But yeah, I think that was a mischaracterization. But in that something is true in that direction. I'm not like a super warm and fuzzy person. My mom can vouch that's probably true. She thinks I am to her and like 3 other people in the world, but it's a short list. So yeah, I think a weakness is like I am not a like warm and fuzzy boss. A strength, I think I think further out into the future than most people do, and I think I appreciate exponential curves more than most people do.
And your career has played that out seemingly.
And what?
I mean, your career sort of this underscores these things. But you've talked publicly about the importance of support, including your mothers. You've talked about Paul and Jessica. I just wondered who else you look up to the most.
I'm not saying this just because she's here, but no, it's true. Like I have a special relationship with my mom. I remember, is this recorded?
Yes.
Okay, it's fine. I think I can tell the story. I think like I got, when I was 17 or something like that, I got this thing called a full ride scholarship to a sort of a college that is good but not as good as Stanford. And there's like 4 kids in my family, and I knew my mom had like a lot of college tuition in her future. And on the other hand, it had been like my life dream to go to Stanford and study computer science. Also I'm gay, and this other school is like in the South, and that my visit there was not perfect. And this was 2003. And my mom and dad, but my mom was sort of like the driver of this conversation, took me out to dinner without my siblings, which was a big treat, and sat down and said, like, look, like, we've been saving for you to go to college. We want you to do this. It is like, we're okay. We're going to make it work. Like, you should, like, we know that, like, you're a computer nerd and, like, this is your life dream. And you should do that, and we'll figure it out, and we'll support you. And, like, you don't have to feel bad about this. Thank you. And that turned out to be a pivotal life decision for me. And there have been others like that where my mom has, like, pushed me, and, I think I get plenty of, like, good business advice, but it's like there are a handful of people in your life that I think you can depend on to give you, like, good life advice. And I've been, it's like your parents, your partner, or my parents, my partner, and like a small handful of other people that I just absolutely trust. PG and Jessica are in that category for sure. And then there's other people who give me incredible professional advice, but that's always like, you get to some point in your career where people are afraid to offend you or say something you might not want to hear. And I am definitely aware that I get stuff filtered and planned out ahead of time at this point. So it's like a limited number of people.
Yeah, that's fine. So I wanted to ask too about your siblings. There was this New York.
Awful.
So are they all here? Your brother, one's an investor.
They've
one's
all been here on and off. One of them will come back here soon, I think, is traveling the world. One of them lives here and runs Lattice, latticehq.com. You should all check it out.
Just raised a Series B.
Just raised a Series B, and my sister lives in LA.
Okay, great. And are you close to them?
Yeah. I mean, we all, my brothers and I, for across 2 houses in many years, all lived together as adults.
Are they still living with you?
No.
Okay, because a couple of years ago, there was this New Yorker article that said that they were going to live with you temporarily, and that it turned into sort of a more full-time.
I had told them back in like 2013 or something that they could come stay with me, or 2012 maybe, while they found a place. It was like that kind of deal, and they never moved out. But it was really fun. It was great. And we definitely have the kind of relationship where they still just drop in unannounced, and it's nice.
Siblings are the best.
Yeah.
Parents are the best. I did want to talk to you. So when that article in the New Yorker had come out like pretty soon before I had sat down on stage with you, and I said, I thought this article was so charming, and you were like, that counts one of us. And I didn't ask what you hated about it.
I reread it for the first, this is like 3 years ago or something that it came out. And I reread it recently. I actually thought it was pretty good. So I was like, my mom called me unisexual in it. I still don't know what that means. That was funny.
As a teenager. That's
yeah,
right.
As a teenager.
She said she was
No, I thought it was pretty good. Rereading it with more hindsight felt pretty good. I think any profile like that, you never feel like it gets across what you really are and what you really care about. And I still don't. It still feels like a caricature.
I get that.
But I read mine as this person wanted to do a book on me. Some person wanted to and I really didn't want to do that, which I am not doing. But in the process of that, I was like, well, go read the article. The article was pretty positive. So I read it again, and I thought it was okay. And then I read the profiles that other tech investors got, and I was like, man, I got an A+.
You got it. I mean, it was really glowing.
It was
really a
But it doesn't feel like me.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I didn't like about it.
I've never been written about, but I can appreciate the sentiment. But one thing you said in the article that I thought I didn't pay attention to when it came out, but in sort of looking at it again before this sit down, I thought, wow, that was really prescient. Before Donald Trump was elected president, you said democracy only works in a growing economy. Without a return to economic growth, the democratic experiment will fail. You're probably, as you would acknowledge yourself, as insulated as anyone in Silicon Valley. So, what clues were you picking up on that so many people weren't?
I definitely think I'm much less insulated than most people.
Oh, really?
I think I don't read Twitter that much, which really helps. I think it's very easy in Silicon Valley to get super isolated, and it's insulated. And I think it's super valuable to sort of travel and try to meet people and stay in touch with people who are not in this vortex. And yeah, I mean, now it's like old news, but at the time it sort of felt vaguely controversial to say most people are not enamored with the tech industry and what it's doing. And I think what's happening is the winners are winning bigger, but it's this narrower and narrower rally. And it's felt like that now for a while. It feels untenable to me. Part of the reason that I've always been excited about YC is that in some sense we're able to rapidly expand access. And part of the reason I'm now so excited about OpenAI is this is too strong of a statement to make, but directionally I believe that only something on the order of the impact of general artificial intelligence can restore global economic growth equitably to everybody.
Okay, last corny question before we get into OpenAI, which
I
know
love
you really
these,
want to
though.
know.
Can't you tell?
Well, okay. So I thought about you. I was again running slowly, listening to a podcast. I love this podcast. Conan O'Brien interviews comedians and writers. He's so funny, but it's very human in a surprising way. So he was talking to Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy Kimmel was saying it was interesting. He was saying that his life is really a grind, and that from the outside looking in, it looks like he's got it made, but he feels sort of trapped and sort of his own making. But he's worried that if he quits, he's not sure if he'll be relevant. He's not sure how his self-perception will change. And I just wondered, your sort of star soared so high at Y Combinator. I just wondered, as you were transitioning out or thinking about leaving, like, was that a concern for you? Did you feel like you're so wrapped up in YC that this would be scary?
I mean, I do care. Well, two things. I do care super deeply about YC, and I'm sure I have like some more ego than I'd like to admit in all of this. However, the thought of like being a little bit less recognized feels quite appealing. And more than that, like, I really do believe, as much as I would like love to go back to a life of relative anonymity, I really do believe the work that we're doing at OpenAI will like not only far eclipse the work that I did at YC, but the work that anyone in the tech industry does. And so I didn't have that like if I were really just retiring, if I were like, you know what, I'm like gonna go off and not work anymore, sure, that'd be hard, because I think like work is so much of my identity. But it feels like this is just this like significant, this is like a big project we're embarking on.
Okay, so I think everybody here has heard of OpenAI, and I think people are still wondering, what is OpenAI exactly?
Sure. We are trying to build safe artificial general intelligence. So it is my belief that in the next few decades, some group of humans will build a software system that is smarter and more capable than humans in every way. And that very quickly it will go from being a little bit more capable than humans to something that is like 1 million or 1 billion times more capable than humans. And this is hard to think about, but at least in my own case, once I accepted that was going to happen, almost impossible to think about anything else. So we're trying to figure out how we do that technically, make it safe and equitable, share the benefits of it, the decision making with it over the world, and so that when we get to this point where, like the von Neumann probes leave Earth and sort of spread consciousness throughout the entire universe until the heat death, that we built something that we're proud of.
How are you so sure it's going to happen? So lots of researchers are sort of afraid to even associate their name with a timeline. You're talking about decades. There was a story, I think maybe in The Verge or Vox.
I think there is a lot of debate about the time frame, and like people get in these huge arguments about whether it's 10 or 20 or 30 years. And even if it's 50 or 70, like for the most important thing in human history to be that close, I think the timeline argument is a distraction.
Perhaps, but I mean, I think there are people who aren't even sure if it's ever going to happen. They think it might happen in 50 years, might happen in 20 years. I just wonder, like, what about applying that big brain to like climate change, which is right here, right now, and like threatening to kill us quite quickly?
Well, I think one of the projects that we will use the technology we develop at OpenAI to do is solve climate change. And I think if humans knew how to solve that unaided, we would hopefully have solved it by now. I'd argue we're failing at both the science and the policy. I do have like a couple of pet ideas about climate change that I'm still independently spending some time on. But my overall belief, and we're encouraging companies to apply to YC, and I would love you to do that. My overall belief is that the best way to get climate change solved is to build really strong AI first. I think it's that hard of a problem.
I hope you're right. So tell us, sort of on a more granular level, what's happening at OpenAI. How many employees do you have? How many PhDs?
I don't know the number of PhDs. We don't count that, but the number of employees is, around 90, I would guess, something like that.
And I guess how much sort of like pure research are you doing?
We're still at a point where everything we do is pure research. We're not building any systems to solve climate change or be industrial robots. All the work we do is still trying to figure out what are the components that we need to build for general artificial intelligence. And so we did a lot of work in 2017 and 2018 with reinforcement learning, robotics, video games, things like that. We're doing a lot of work right now with unsupervised learning. So we have this now text model that can read the internet, learn to predict the next word, but not with any labels, just true unsupervised learning. And it feels to me like it's starting to understand. And then there's some other components that we have to build as well. But we're definitely in the stage of a research company. There are big pieces of the problem that we don't know how to do yet.
I just wondered, I'm sure people are attracted to the organization because of your involvement, but I just wondered, if it's hard to compete. Hard to compete and also hard to hire. If you can go to OpenAI or you can go to, I don't know who you consider your competitors, if it's Google or Microsoft or
Yeah, it's really
China.
hard. I think the most in-demand people to hire right now are sort of, really great AI researchers. And we are badly outgunned financially by any of those companies. So I think we have a mission that is appealing to people. You do feel like you're sort of working on behalf of the world, not on behalf of a single tech company. And you're sort of trying to, the thrill of discovery is really exciting. So it's fun to work on that instead of sort of optimizing ad clicks. But even then, it's extremely hard to successfully recruit someone that Google desperately wants to hire.
Well, also, Google has business units and it's got objectives, and it just seems like OpenAI is so sort of amorphous, but it is a business. So I'm just wondering, eventually, is the idea to kind of license technologies? Will you have customers that you're going to be customizing algorithms for them, or how is it going to work?
The honest answer is we have no idea. We have never made any revenue. We have no current plans to make revenue. We have no idea how we may one day generate revenue. We have made a soft promise to investors that once we've built this sort of generally intelligent system, basically we will ask it to figure out a way to generate an investment return for you. It sounds like an episode of Silicon Valley. It really does. I get it. You can laugh. It's all right. But it is what I actually believe is going to happen. So there aren't many things like this where they're so difficult to reason about and so powerful that if you can build it, there's that joke that I actually think is very funny, which is step 1 is do this thing, step 2 is do this thing, question mark, question mark, question mark, profit. But I think if AGI is on the table, that's actually okay. And if we have to take 1/1000th of 1% of the value that we create and return it to investors, and then figure out how to share the rest sort of equally among the world, that feels okay.
So, there's just no metrics for them to rely on here. It's just poof, here's money and.
Yeah, it's an odd fundraising conversation. I will tell you that.
So is it mostly individual investors? I know Reid Hoffman was obviously.
Yeah. It has historically been mostly individual investors. As we massively ramp up our capital needs, I expect that to change.
Institutions it just seems like a really hard sell if you're,
Yeah.
especially since we don't know when it could be hundreds of years from now.
I don't think it will be. But, it's an open, I think one thing that no one knows yet is just how much money you need.
Yeah.
Billions for sure, tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions. I sure hope not. But the fundraising strategy will have to adapt as we learn more about what we need.
I guess if you do raise billions of dollars, what is going to be your sort of biggest differentiator then, OpenAI versus the megacorps?
I hope that our biggest differentiator is number 1, we do the best research in the world, and number 2, we care the most about how it gets deployed. We're not trying to make Google more ad revenue or whatever they do now. We're not a government trying to think about how to build super weapons. We sit there all day and stress about what this means for sort of the continuation of humanity and how we want to design a structure where the world gets input and benefit from what we're doing.
Okay, now this is the part of the interview where I shift into criticisms.
Okay.
I'm sure this is nothing you've never heard before, but I talked to researchers. I've probably talked, in fairness, like not the entire research community. I've probably talked to 10 people
Yeah.
over time. But people are really upset about OpenAI. I was really surprised by this.
When we didn't release the GPT-2 model, people got really upset.
They got really upset about it because, I mean, my understanding, and from, again, various people, is that everything is sort of qualitative, not quantitative. So, the language model was you applying 10 times the compute power, 10 times the GPUs, and coming up with something kind of interesting,
Yeah.
but nothing that was not developed beforehand. And sort of, people feel like you guys made it sound like you invented something new.
Well, I'm sure that's not the criticism I've heard. I'm sure plenty of people say it. I think the criticism that I felt a lot was, y'all did do this really impressive new thing, and you're not sharing it. And that's against the norms of the community. The ML research community has traditionally been an academic community where everything is open and shared, and it's available to anybody who wants it. And for the second time ever with OpenAI, we decided that we weren't going to release GPT-2, the full model weights, but that we were going to do it in stages. So we said, we've got this thing. We think it is so good that it can be used for harm, so powerful that it can be used for harm. And we are going to tell the world about it first, because we have not yet built up sort of like societal antibodies for fake text in the way we have for photoshopped images. And then we will gradually release it over time. And so we've put out now increasingly sized models, but still nothing near the bleeding edge of our internal capabilities. And the academic community did not like that. Most of the rest of the world said, like, that seems reasonable, and we're glad you're thinking about the consequences of technology instead of just releasing everything. But it is a hard decision, and it is definitely against the norm of the field. And I think as time goes on and we get closer and closer to this true generalized system, we're, I think, going to have to release less and less. And I do think people are going to be upset by that.
They were upset by that, and I think the most cynical take on that was, oh, look at the timing. They've decided to stop open sourcing, and now they're becoming this capped profit company that's very much like a for-profit company, and like I'm drawing a line from one thing to another. You say not.
Yeah. I think like if we wanted to make money, there are things that we could do with what we've currently developed. That language model is actually not at the top of the list, but I think like our robotics work, for example. And I get this suspicion, and it's particularly bad because like the honest truth is like we do have to figure out how to make a return for our investors at some point, and we don't know how we're going to do it. And that should arise question marks for anyone. But I think the bigger issue, at least in the ML community, will continue to be that we're going to have to not release research.
Well, I'll tell you the other criticism that I heard repeatedly was, well, there's a few things. That it's qualitative, not quantitative. Also, the talk sort of, which I think kind of started with Elon Musk and seems to kind of continue in the vein of like safe artificial general intelligence, is that it's a little bit of fear mongering. I'm telling you what I've heard from other people. They say it doesn't even exist. It's not dangerous, and OpenAI is sort of and not as bad. It's sort of a bad player for saying that it might be.
I do have some sympathy to that argument, but I hope, on the other hand, we collectively have learned in the tech industry that if you're building something on an exponential curve and you don't think about the societal consequences early, the same people who say OpenAI is fear-mongering or whatever are the same ones that say, well, shouldn't Facebook have thought about this before they did it? And I think this is like us trying to think about it before we do it. I do think that much of the secret to building AI is just going to be scaling these systems bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that GPT-2 model, maybe we were an order of magnitude or two too early on when we said, okay, we're not going to release this. But I'd much rather be a little bit too early than a little bit too late, and to push a button that you can't unpush and put something out into the world. And so in some sense, I have a lot of sympathy for this argument because I don't like all the hand wringing over like, oh, all of technology is really awful and evil and that. On the other sense, like I think we as an industry have failed the good faith test of presuming that we're going to be really thoughtful about how we use all of this. And it's on us to show that we will be. And I hope that OpenAI can be somewhat of a norm setter there. I think a thing that's wrapped up maybe in that is we do get a lot of press attention. And I think that does bother people. And so maybe it's like, well, the thing that they did was an improvement, but only because of scale, and they got all this attention, and that feels unfair.
Yeah, basically what I heard was these guys do something incremental, or they credit you with doing something interesting, but because you added more pieces, and then you run to the press. But honestly, I mean, I did sort of think about that, and I thought, well, even if it is maybe a little bit about marketing, maybe that's not such a bad thing. I mean, are you trying to just get more attract more attention to this?
We actually don't. So one thing I think we do is make extremely good blog posts that are like interactive and pretty compelling to read. And in some sense that's run into the press because people write about it. But we're not like sitting there dialing every journalist saying like, please come write about this thing. I felt caught off guard by the amount of attention that GPT-2 got, and I thought it was a great result. So I think part of it is people are like really interested in covering this, and we do, in a way that the field traditionally has not, we do produce, I think, pretty approachable and cool demos.
I think we're running out of time, but I did want to ask, like, of the risks that you're concerned of, like, what's the most immediate? Is it? Do you know enough about what you're sort of staring into?
With AI specifically, or
Yeah.
generally in the world right now?
No, with AI specifically. Are there sort of priorities, and you're sort of like, this is level red,
It's
orange?
it's a decently long list. I personally find the idea of autonomous weapons and sort of thinking through where that could go quite scary. But maybe the thing that I would say is at the top of the list, although in some sense a special case of that, is I think the cybersecurity issues we're going to face with advanced AI are eye-wateringly bad and not taken particularly seriously. And given that these systems are sort of getting one order of magnitude more powerful per year, it's very difficult to reason about how seriously we have to take that problem. So I think that'll be one of the first areas where we see significant societal threats. If you just think about like how much of our life is dependent on connected computers at this point, I'm very worried about that as the sort of shortest term issue.
So I know you don't have customers yet. You're not sure if and when you'll sell to anybody. Talking about guns and connectedness, and I just wonder if you could say how you would feel about ever selling or working with the military.
I'm definitely not totally opposed to it, and I think the thing that like is popular in Silicon Valley right now of saying like we will, we're going to make a sort of loyalty test statement that we would never work with the military under any conditions. Like, no, I can definitely imagine conditions where we would do anything we could to help the military, and I can imagine a lot where we wouldn't. But like the answer, like most of life, is it depends.
And can I also ask, I meant to ask this sooner, but Elon Musk had sort of left the organization, I guess maybe last year. He stepped off the board.
A year and a little bit ago.
Yeah, and he said it was sort of just, we're friends, but it was a disagreement. Can you say what the disagreement was over?
It was mostly because Tesla is working on a bunch of AI stuff, and some people from OpenAI went to work at Tesla, and it was like a little bit messy. We certainly have, like occasional philosophical, we should pursue this direction or that direction disagreements, and also sort of like how to think about the safety issues. But like, we're close. He's cool. Like, he's still extremely helpful to OpenAI.
Let's see. I know I've got to let you go here.
No, I can keep going. Go for it. Well, I'm sure people are getting bored, but otherwise.
I guess I should probably let the crowd ask you some questions too. Wait. Oh, I did want to talk to you about fundraising.
Yeah.
Okay, this is another thing people hate. this capped profit idea. Well, they think it's very clever positioning. And I have to say, I don't disagree, although I do think it's brilliant. You know, it's just the idea, if you want to explain to people, is that when you do get investment, your investors can get up to 100x back first before you put more money into sort of advocacy and education.
Well, no, it's before we just distribute the money to the world or whatever.
Right. But 100x is a huge bar. I mean, WhatsApp sold for $22 billion for Facebook. Sequoia had written them a $60 million check, and that was like, actually, I thought it would have been higher, but it was like a 50x return. So you'd have to be sort of one of the most profitable companies or valuable companies, I guess, in the world in order for your investors to sort of, you know.
Look, I think it's cool for people to make money investing in companies. I think capitalism needs to adapt, but fundamentally it's a system that I believe in. The problem with AGI specifically is that if we're successful and we tried, maybe we could like capture the light cone of all future value in the universe. And that is for sure not okay for one group of investors to have. And so our thought was, and that was only for the first round, like the first round investors in WhatsApp made much more than 100x. You know, subsequent investors in OpenAI will make a cap of much less than 100x. It will come down to hopefully 1x near the end. But for our seed round investors, you know, YC sometimes makes 10,000, maybe 100,000x, I don't know, on some investments. For our seed round investors, taking a risk on this thing, which is improbable at best, to get a 100x return, and then willingly give up all their future returns, and for the company to give up and the employees to give up the future returns to share with the world as a whole, felt really fair. And I think a lot of the criticism of us I've heard, but this particular thing, people are like, why is it only 100x, not 1,000? Like that 100 doesn't sound enough.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's great to know that, so it's going to come down over time.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Assuming we're doing well.
Right. And your
Like
seed
our risk-adjusted return hopefully just gets better and better every year.
Okay. Well, I think it's brilliant either way. Did anybody want to ask? Oh, gosh, okay. Let's see. Are you sure you can stick around for a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Minhaz. I come from Bangladesh.
Nice to meet you.
And I have actually come all the way to meet you.
Wow.
So my question is, as you see startups coming into Y Combinator, what percentage you see in year-on-year growth in terms of participation from outside of US, and what percentage you see or growth on the side of, let's say, purpose first, and do you think the next Silicon Valley is not from within US or outside?
Okay, I'll answer all three in order. At this point, most of our growth is outside the US. There's this wonderful phenomenon that we have where a company will come here from somewhere else in the world. Let's say Bogota, Rappi comes here. They go on to be really successful. They go back, and like we get incredible free marketing out of that. And they tell everyone how great this thing called YC is, and that there's this thing called a startup that they should start. And then after that happens, now we have a ton of Colombian startups applying to YC. And this happens, like basically we have like this one success case in a new market, and then we are flooded in it the best way with companies from there. And at this point, I won't say that's where all of our growth comes from, but I bet most of it is non-US. So that's wonderful. And I think that is part of why I believe YC has an easy 10x in front of it of growth in the next 10 or 20 years. In terms of purpose-driven companies, yes. In fact, that is now one of the first questions I ask a company. There's like, you could look out there at that sea of startups, literally, and why you're going to choose one or the other is unclear. And the only thing that is cheap and easy when capital is this abundant is capital. Concentrating talent in a company has never been harder than it is today. Everybody wants to start a company or be employee number one. And the question of like, how are you going to get enough really good people together to sort of put their talents and time and effort into your company, that's like one of the first questions I ask. And the companies that don't have an answer to that, they have a real challenge. What was your third question?
Where is going to be next Silicon Valley?
Oh, next Silicon Valley. Well, there was never another Florence quite either. It all just sort of diffused. And I think this has been a moment like the Renaissance that we will not see again for this one industry in any one particular place. It'll just sort of be everywhere.
All right, as I'm walking, I'm going to ask you, SoftBank, good,
Yeah.
bad, neutral?
You know, I don't spend much time thinking about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm Salman, and I'm based in Pakistan and UAE. It was really a pleasure listening to your thoughts, and
Thank
it's
you.
an honor to have your mom with
Yes.
us. Thank you very much. My question is, as a Silicon Valley ambassador, what is that one advice that you have for President Trump on global economy?
Fix immigration. Like if I could pick one policy that I think would help the global economy, in particular the U.S. economy, it would be that. The number of our founders, the percentage of our founders and founders of tech companies in general that are immigrants is quite high. I think it has been one of the U.S.'s great advantages is the ability to concentrate talent here, and I think it's benefited the whole world too. And I'm very scared about that. What? Oh, really? I've been super busy all day, so I haven't gotten to read the news.
I know there was a question in the back, too. No? Okay, I think we're going to make this the last one so we can let these guys go out for their dinner. Okay, another question,
Yeah.
Sam. I don't think you're a Trump supporter.
Definitely not.
Okay, so do you like any of the candidates for...
Honestly, I would take any of them over Trump. I think they would all be. I'd happily take that trade.
Thanks so much, Sam. I was curious, your thoughts on the facial recognition ban that just happened in the city?
So I heard that happened, and that is literally the only sentence I know about it. It's hard to have a strong opinion without understanding it more. I definitely have some concerns about facial recognition being widely deployed, and then I think there's like some ways in which it's a really good thing to do. But I'd say my posture towards it is one of more concern, not less. And so it would depend on the details. But I think we have to have a real conversation as a society about how we want to do that. I think at every big new technological revolution, some of the things that we sort of hold as society, but that have some asterisks, like the right to free speech, that's always had some asterisks, and now it's going to get some more, I hope, for the internet, because that's different than what you can say in a town square. And the right to privacy, there's like one version of this, which is, sometimes you are allowed to break into someone's home with the right stuff, and a different level of expectation on the street. And when everything interesting is digital or digitally captured, like what does that mean? And we're going to have to evolve all of that. And so the specifics of it matter a lot to me. There's versions of it that I think I could support, and there's versions of it that I think would be unacceptable. And I don't know enough beyond that to comment on this specific one.
I've always loved about you that you're so brilliant, but you're willing to say when you don't know enough about something.
I think it's better than saying something wrong.
Absolutely. Sam, thank you so
Thank you
much.
for
It's
having me.
such a joy
It
to
really was
talk
fun.
to you. Really, really appreciate it.